In the 1800s, at a very prestigious boys' school in England called Harrow, a boy by the name of Robert Peel vandalized a door. Whether he was bored or urged on by some of the other boys in the class, or maybe he just wanted to make his mark, but he took a penknife and he carved his initials into the door that was leading into the classroom. For his misdemeanor, he was given 20 lashings from a bamboo cane by a very irate headmaster. And why wouldn't the headmaster be irate? That door went all the way back to the 1600s, and now it had been defaced. It was a prank that may simply have been forgotten, except that Robert Peel would go on to become the Prime Minister of England. And before long, other boys who attended that fourth form classroom at Harrow would start doing the same thing, in the hopes that they too may become famous, and each one receiving a few whacks of the cane for his trouble. Well, as it would turn out, more than a fair share of boys from that school did become famous. Harrow, it turns out, would produce some giants. Spencer Perceval had his name carved in the door. He was another future prime minister. In fact, the only prime minister of England ever to be assassinated. The writers Lord Byron and Richard Sheridan have their names carved side by side. Anthony Trollope, another famous novelist, has his name carved into the door as well. But perhaps the most famous name carved into that door, maybe the most famous graduate from Harrow, was Winston Churchill. Today it's a custom that every boy who passes through that classroom carve his name into the door. Two things have changed. Now they're not given a cane for doing so. In fact, they're all encouraged to do so as a rite of passage. And secondly, the door has long since been filled up with names, and so now they carve their names on the walls all around the classroom. It's really a fascinating room. You should Google it and take a look at it. And as a side note, if you are a Harry Potter fan, that classroom with all the signatures was used as Professor Flitwick's classroom, where Harry Potter took his lessons on spells in the movie The Philosopher's Stone. The door in Harrow's fourth form classroom is one of the world's most famous doors. It represents the passage of time. It also represents all the hopes and dreams of those young people, and young people everywhere who pass through the doors of our classroom off to make their mark in the world, symbolized by the marking of that door. So I want to talk about doors for a few moments today. Someone once wrote, as I said earlier, that behind every door there is a story. Some happy, some tragic, some mundane, and some very exciting, but always a story. Unlike walls that separate and divide, doors invite us and they encourage us. They draw us to them. We wonder, if I turn this handle and push this door open, what will I find on the other side? What world will be revealed to me? What story will unfold as I cross this threshold? Charlie Keyes once said, "There are so many doors to open, I am impatient to begin." And isn't it true? So many doors, so many adventures that can intrigue us. And as a result, doors can evoke all kinds of emotions in us and all kinds of responses. Curiosity, for one. Remember that old game show, Let's Make a Deal, with Monty Hall? He would always say, "You can take this gold watch or whatever's behind door number one." Remember watching that? You always wanted them to take what was behind door number one because you wanted to see what was behind that door, even if it was like a chocolate bar or a bale of hay. Sometimes doors can elicit excitement, like knocking on grandma's door, knowing that there are hugs and treats on the other side. Others can give us a wary feeling or a feeling of fear. 2 years ago, I took a tour of the Kingston Penitentiary, and when that iron door clanged open and we went inside, it was a mixture of excitement but also fear, wondering what shadows or ghosts we would find in that 18th or 19th century prison in which it housed so many notorious criminals. Or how about this? Did you know there's a good reason why a lot of dentist offices moved into shopping malls? Going to the dentist for many people evokes fear. And studies show that you are more likely to go to a dentist if you don't have to pry open a door to get there. The act of physically having to open a door and cross a threshold into a fearful place was a huge barrier for people. And so they put them in shopping malls with a nice open desk at the front, and you were ushered into a room. You never had to touch a door handle or open a door. And for a lot of people, that was a lot less threatening. And sometimes doors can have significant meaning for people just unique to them. We can build our own symbolism into doors. When I was in my last church in New Brunswick, there was a gentleman in our congregation who was really one of the elder statesmen of the whole town. Decorated war vet, successful businessman, and church elder. He was a man of significant stature, both physically as well as symbolically. He was over 6 feet tall, had a loud, booming voice. He was someone who evoked both respect and a wee bit of fear. Actually, more than a wee bit of fear for a new young minister coming from Toronto. Shortly after arriving in town, I was invited by this gentleman to go to his house for tea. He made a point of saying that I was to go in through the front door. I don't know where else he thought I was going to go. I mean, I'm not Santa. So I arrived, and everything about that house was very intimidating. It was a big old house on top of a hill. Even the front door was intimidating. It had one of those big Gothic handles that you knocked to say that you were there. So I grabbed the handle, I knocked it, and it felt like it was reverberating all through the town, and it was covering up my heart that was beating just as quickly. Anyway, the door was opened by this man, and I was ushered inside, and he closed the door behind me, and I wondered if I was ever going to see my wife and kids again. Anyway, his wife made a beautiful tea, and we sat, we visited for an hour or so, and then he stood up and he shook my hand. He said, "Thanks for coming." He said, "Follow me." And we walked down the hallway into the kitchen where there was a side door. And he said to me, he said, "If I didn't like you, I would have sent you out the front door where you came in. But I do like you. So you can use the side door and always know that you're very welcome here." And I so appreciated that, but of course then I thought about how I'd made a visit last week and I left through the front door that I'd entered into, so I guess you can't always win them all. Doors are significant, and they often have great symbolic meaning. Did you know in Hollywood movies, they're used purposely to move a plot along, or to capture a relationship between people, or to demonstrate a plot twist? Let me give you a couple of examples. In the original movie, The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, played by Julie Garland, walks through a door separating her from the black and white world of her home to the colorful, magical world of Munchkinland. The door represented the separation between those two realities. How about the Disney movie Frozen? When Princess Elsa discovers she has magical powers she can't control, she's overcome with fear, and she separates herself in her room and closes the door. There's a scene in which she and her sister are both sitting on opposite sides of the door. They're back against the door, and although separated by just a couple of inches of wood, it represents the separation between the two sisters emotionally. And then eventually when she throws the door open, it is the coming together again of those two people, a transition in their relationship. Or do you remember The Truman Show, starring Jim Carrey? That's an old movie. It's a good movie. He played a character who was trapped in a reality TV show, but he didn't know he was in the show. All the people around him, his friends and his family, were all actors. And he was on a giant stage living out his life, being watched by millions of people at home. He had no idea. He thought he was a regular person having a regular life. Remember what happens in the end? He was always told never to open the blue door. Finally, he opens the blue door. And for the first time in his life, he realizes that he's been trapped in a fake world. Beyond the door is an entirely new world. He's both excited, electrified, and horrified, all at the same moment. I always thought that's a great symbol for life. Have you ever felt trapped in a reality that you didn't know was limiting you until suddenly that reality changes and it feels like you've opened a door to something new and fresh and life-giving, but also scary? Doors can be rich in meaning. Behind every door, there is a story. So let's go into your home for a few minutes. Not literally. We'll still keep our distance. But I want you to think about the doors that are in your home. From where you're sitting right now, look around you. How many doors do you see? And if those doors could tell a story, if they could tell your story, what would they tell us? What secrets would they reveal? What moments and milestones would those doors have captured? For example, who's the most interesting person who's ever shown up at your front door? Have you ever been surprised by someone at your front door? Hi, we're here to stay with you for a week. Have you ever ignored somebody at your front door? You know the old joke, right? If the Jehovah's Witnesses have it right all along, we're all going to get to heaven, get to the pearly gates, we're going to knock on the gates, and all we're going to hear on the other side is, shh, be quiet, and maybe they'll go away. How about people leaving your front door? Saying goodbye is a big part of life. It's a difficult part of life, symbolized by the front door. How about doors inside your home? What do they tell us about you? Have you ever slammed a door in a fit of anger? Or opened a door in a moment of exuberant joy? Doors represent our need both for privacy, but also our desire to welcome in. In other words, they represent our need to be able to control our own lives, to be able to welcome in the world, and sometimes to be able to shut that world away. Let's not stop at doors. What about door frames? They could be significant too. We lean against them when we're talking to someone or telling a story, or we fill them with our presence as we decide, do we go in or do we stay out? Sometimes we decorate them, and sometimes we write on them. When we left our last house in New Brunswick, the house was empty and the rest of my family had left already, and I was alone in the house just waiting for the movers to finish up outside. I took a walk through the house, and I was totally fine until I came to the door frame of one of the bedrooms, and there marked in pencil were the heights of all the kids. And suddenly I was a mess of tears. Behind every door there is a story of lives lived, of loves shared, of moments captured forever as memories. But let's go even deeper with this for a couple of moments. In terms of our spiritual or emotional lives, our inner selves, what do doorways represent? Last week I spoke about how foundations represent the things in our lives that are solid and unchanging. Doorways are exactly the opposite. They represent that which is fluid in our lives. They are symbols of change and transition. To cross a threshold is literally to move from one space to another space. That also makes them symbols of opportunity. Seek and you will find. Ask and you will receive. Knock and the door will be open to you, said Jesus. Doors represent movement and transition and change, and therefore they represent opportunity. Just as in that opening story, the door at Harrow represented the opening of those young people's lives to the world where they could make their mark. So here we come full circle again to this situation that we find ourselves in today. We are in a very fluid time right now. We are in a season of change and transition. But what is interesting is that this season we're in is not symbolized by the opening of doors, but by the closing of doors. It's symbolized literally by the closing of doors everywhere. Almost 7 weeks ago now, you could almost hear the slamming of doors all over the world as everything shut down. The gym you go to every day, closed. Your favorite clothing store, closed. The movie theater down the street, closed. School, closed. The restaurant you go to every Friday night for dinner, closed. The border, closed. Bang, 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 bang. Doors started to shut, and then what we were told, go into your home and do what? Close the door. It's no wonder that we struggle, because we are a people who are used to everything being open. We are an all-access population. We're used to being able to swing open the doors of the places where we want to be and cross pretty much any threshold that we want to cross. And as a result, not only does this affect our physical movement, it affects our spiritual movement as well. Because if we're not careful, we start closing doors within. We start closing ourselves off. How do we deal with a reality that is nearly the opposite from what we experienced all of our lives? However temporary it may be, a new reality that's lived behind closed doors. Live without access to everything that we're used to having access to. Let me go back to what I already said. Doors and doorways are symbols of change. Therefore, they're symbols of opportunity. That's obvious when we think about opening doors, but maybe even closed doors too. Is there opportunity in crisis? I want to show you one of the most iconic pictures in Christian history. It's the painting of Jesus knocking at the door. This was loaned to me by Reverend Don and Chris J. This painting hung in Central United Church, where Reverend Don was a minister for many years. It's now at St. John Vianney Church here in Barrie, and this was a picture that was presented to Don and Chris. Some people call it Jesus knocking at the door. It's actually called the light of the world. And something to note, of course, is that there's no handle on the door, meaning the door can only be opened from the inside. The message is that for Jesus to come into our lives, we have to open the door to let him in. You can see why this symbol, therefore, has been a very powerful image of faith. But let me tell you how I think about that image. The world has closed its doors on us for a time. Life has closed its doors on us for a time. Familiarity has closed its doors on us for a time. And eventually, hopefully not too long from now, life will come knocking again and will invite us to open those doors, and the doors will open, and we'll emerge back into the world, and we'll see our friends again, and we'll go to the places that we want to go again. But until then, we have an opportunity to go deeper within ourselves and decide how we want to emerge back into the world. I listened to a podcast a couple of days ago from a guy called Rabbi Steve Leder. He did a really interesting talk on getting through these times, and he said this: how sad if within a short time of getting back to normal, we immediately return to our default settings. He was, of course, referring to how we tend as human beings to go back to the same old patterns of thinking and action after a change. Instead, he said, we've been given the opportunity to rethink how we want to be in relationship with the world, in relationship with creation, in relationship with each other. With the world on pause, we have an opportunity to think about whether we like our default settings. If not, what do we want to change? We have an opportunity, while behind these closed doors, to ask ourselves some of the most probing and profound questions we may ever have asked ourselves before. So I want to ask some of those questions of you for just a moment, kind of like a little meditation time. So if you're comfortable, I invite you, if you want to, just to close your eyes so you can really listen to the questions and think about how you might respond to them. Am I happy with my life? Is there a part of my life that I may be shortchanging? Am I using the gifts and the skills that God has given to me to use? Have I achieved that goal I set for myself long ago? Are my relationships strong? If not, what do I have to do, or change, or sacrifice, or add to strengthen them again? Am I in a balanced, harmonious relationship with the natural world? Am I giving back as much as I am taking? Am I respecting rather than exploiting? Can I be a better citizen of planet Earth? Are my priorities straight? Are there doors that I need to open that can usher something new into my life? Or are there doors I need to close? Things in my life that haven't been working that I can now finally put behind me? Are there burdens or worries that maybe I can finally put down? Is there something broken that I can fix? Is there something beautiful that I can release? The doors have closed and the world is on pause. They say that for the first time in decades you can walk down the Las Vegas Strip and you can actually hear the birds chirping. Nobody wants to be where we are today. Nobody. But every spiritual practice in the world will tell you that with every crisis, there is an opportunity. There's an expression in the Talmud that says that we see with clarity through the blackest part of the eye. It is the dark pupil that gives us sight. And sometimes darkness can allow us to see light in a way we've never seen it before. So can I encourage you, as you are behind your closed door, take some time and do some soul searching. Because before you know it, there will be a knock at your door. It will be life inviting you back out into the world to cross that threshold. And won't that be a wonderful day? So maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Maybe the most important question is not when will we emerge, but it's how will we emerge. When that day comes and the doors swing open again, how are you going to emerge back into life? To figure that out means having the courage to see this time not simply as an inconvenience or a punishment, but as an opportunity to go deep, to embrace honestly and with vulnerability, to learn more about ourselves and maybe make changes, to peer into the darkness and see where there may be a new beam of light. And we do this always embraced by God's love, our companion through the door to the deepest places within us. I began this sermon by talking about a door in England. I want to end this sermon by talking about another door in England. For a moment, let's go into Westminster Abbey and walk through that beautiful church until you find a steep staircase that leads down to the crypts, where there are buried some of England's finest spiritual leaders. On the door of one of the crypts of an Anglican bishop believed to have been buried there in 1100 AD, there is written the following message. When I was young and free, my imagination had no limits. I dreamed of changing the world. As I grew older and wiser, I discovered the world would not change. So I shortened my sight somewhat and decided to change only my country. But it too seemed immovable. As I grew into my twilight years, in one last desperate attempt, I settled for changing only my family, those closest to me. But alas, they would have none of it. And now as I lie on my deathbed, I suddenly realize if I had only changed myself first, then by example, I would have changed my family. From their inspiration and encouragement, I would have been able to better my country. And who knows, I may even have changed the world. Behind every door, there's a story, and there's an opportunity to grow, to change, to start afresh, for we must be ready when the knock comes to open up again. Amen. I'm going to share a closing prayer, and as always, I'm going to say the Lord's Prayer, and I hope you'll say it with me at home. Let us pray. For the words we have heard, for the music we have sung and listened to, for the prayers we have lifted up, for the spirits we have nurtured, we give thanks. How valuable are these moments to be still and calm and peaceful. How valuable are these moments to remember that we are still part of a vibrant community of faith. How valuable are these moments to know that we are fully embraced by your love for us. May we challenge ourselves this week to journey within and traverse the inner landscapes of our hopes and dreams, our worries, our wishes. And in so doing, ask ourselves, who have I been? Who am I now? And who am I becoming? And behind those closed doors of our homes, may we be gentle and understanding towards ourselves and each other, looking with hope to the future while embracing the moment with resolve and self-compassion. May you bless and keep now all those whom we name to you in our silent prayers. God, hear our prayers. Journey now with us through another week ahead, leading us through the valley of shadows to the light of a new day which will come with a knock on the door and an invitation to live fully again. And here now, as together we say the words of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I invite you back again next week. I think next week we're going to go into the kitchen for the third in our series, Home Sweet Home. Just before we sing Go Now in Peace, I'd like to end with a benediction called The Melody of the Land. May we hear the melody of life and find ourselves singing harmony. May we be open to the discords in the song of the land and its people, that we may be part of the world's urging towards justice, healing, peace, and love. May we feel in our bones the rhythms of life and the land and find ourselves dancing. Have a good week, everybody, and see you next week.